Perfect. So today is our official guidance on using state and federal funds to promote teacher retention for districts and accredited non-public schools. This is our audience for today. Go ahead to the next slide, please. Overview of today will be introduction, teacher eligibility, requirements for teacher retention payments, and then questions and additional guidance. Next slide, please. So in the governor's condition of the state, as most of you heard, she announced that full-time classroom teachers in Iowa would receive a $1,000 retention payment for their work during the pandemic. As a means of providing this premium pay, the state is offering $1,000 to each eligible full-time teacher and pre-K through 12 in-person classroom teacher who stayed on the job through the pandemic and continues teaching to the end of this school year. And then on behalf of the governor, it's the Department of Education that will distribute these funds to you on a reimbursement basis, much like the other mechanisms we have used to distribute funds to you, since we already have a system in place to engage with you and help support that need. Next slide. Is this me or Steve? Sorry.
That one's me.
Okay, I'm going to hand it off now to Steve. So most of you know that Steve is the guy that handles, has the answers to these questions. He is the one you've worked with previously. He is our relief funds guru and the one that will be handling most of this. So I'm going to hand this part over to him. Jay will be addressing some of the slides later also, but he will go over the technical parts and walk you through this process as well. Thanks, Steve.
You're welcome. So for purposes of awarding the retention payments to Iowa teachers, an eligible teacher means an individual who is employed as a full-time in-person classroom teacher. An example that would not be is somebody who is in an administrative position that also has a teaching license. So that wouldn't. Next, by a school district, an accredited non-public school, a specially accredited non-public school, a state and or independently accredited non-public school, and not on administrative leave. And it gives the definition down there that teachers on administrative leave will be counted, but only receive payment if the administrative suspension is resolved by June 30th of 2022. Next slide, please. So to talk about this, in addition, each full-time in-person classroom teacher employed in a public school or an accredited non-public must hold a valid practitioner's license issued under Iowa Code Chapter 242 and have been reported to the department in the fall 2021 beds staff collection. Next slide. And what I'll do is I'll talk a little bit about the process here, and then I'll go ahead and hand that off to Jay when we go into the next slide. So if we're talking about public schools, accredited non-public schools, what we have is a fall beds collection. There will be an application which will end up being opened. And what will happen is it will list all of the full-time in classroom teachers that we think that were reported in beds. And then the administrator will then take off or uncheck those that do not meet the qualifications to receive the $1,000 payment. After that, then what you will do is you will get a copy of the teacher agreement and distribute that to all eligible teachers, and they will sign off on that. And then they will return it to you, the administrator or the person collecting for the district. They will collect that and you will keep that for a period of time. And then after that's all done, you will end up certifying the statement in the application, and we will send you the administrator something else that will, it's called the teacher, where's it at? We will send you the other information, the supplemental agreement, which you will sign off on, that says that you've collected everything, and that you will sign off on a number of assurances. At that point in time, then the district during the March payment period will end up paying the teachers the $1,000, and then the department on April 1st will process the reimbursement payments, and it should be in the district's bank account by the 8th of April. The district, as it says down at the bottom, has to maintain the document for each recipient completed during that current year's assignment. Same thing over here for the accredited non-publics. It goes through the same process. There will be something that they can check off, anybody who does not qualify based upon what was indicated in the application for beds. They'll print off those teacher agreements, which says that they assured that they will remain for the remainder of the school year. In addition, as we talked about before, the head administrator of that accredited non-public will then receive assurances that they will need to sign off on. Same thing happens here, that during the March payment period, because most people are paid on a monthly basis, they will be paid in March, and then the department will process those payments on April 1st. And then the reimbursement should end up in the non-public district or non-public schools account by April 8th at the latest. Next slide. Jay, if you want to go ahead and take it from here.
Thanks, Steve. Jay Pennington here at the department. I'm just going to mention a few things about how you're actually going to go in and work on the teacher lists and verify who is going to receive one of these teacher retention or premium pay. So instead of collecting the list of teachers in your districts or non-pubs, we decided that we were going to leverage the information that you provided to us in the fall bed staff application. We've created a new application called the Teacher Retention Pay Application. It's actually live now if you log into the Iowa Education Portal and then click on the EdInfo link. There'll be a new application. We preloaded everyone that had access to report through fall bed staff, now has access to this new application. We assumed that those were going to be the right people since they submit your HR information to begin with. The list that you'll see on this new application was based on your fall 2021 staff submission. So it includes any full-time teacher that was, submitted with that collection. Anyone that was hired after your district or non-pub submitted that information will be missing. There is the chance or there is the functionality that you can go ahead and add people that might not have been listed. Anyone, just to highlight something that Steve said a little bit earlier, anyone that had like an administrative or other position code was not included in that list. This app is live. It's important that you don't certify the application until you collect all the supplemental teacher agreements. So next slide, Hannah. This is a screenshot of what you're going to see when you log into the portal. Click on that teacher retention application. There's actually a bunch of instructions at the top, which is a little bit of a repetition. It includes like who's eligible, that information. There is a checkbox for you to go ahead and certify. Again, don't certify until you have reviewed who's eligible. by default, when you log into the application, it's going to list every teacher that's eligible in your district. So if you have 100 teachers, it'll list 100. If you have 3,000 teachers, it's going to list all 3,000. In order to make that manageable, we did create this drop down so you can filter by building and just verify those teachers in each of those locations. That information was loaded based on their primary building assignment. I know there are cases where some teachers, are in multiple buildings. It's wherever you put them in your fall bed staff collection as their primary. The other thing that we wanted to try to avoid was for those that have a tremendous number of teachers, we're going to automatically check this checkbox. So by default, they're going to receive that. We're going to assume that they're eligible. So for anyone that left since you submitted your fall bed staff, or just go ahead and uncheck that select box so that we make sure that they don't actually receive a payment that they're not eligible for. So hopefully by leveraging the fall bed staff information that you've already provided, pre-populating it in this application, that we can try to make this new collection a little less painful for you and your district. Once you've reviewed all that information, go ahead and click this the certify button, and you're also going to need to tell us how many assurances you received from districts, and then hopefully that number matches the list that you provided in the teacher retention pay application. Just a couple, so that's sort of step one, getting into the application, reviewing all of your staff, and then sending out that information. I'm going to turn it back over to Steve, who's going to take you through the rest of the process. You're muted, Steve.
Hannah, will you go back one slide? So as I just wanted to go ahead and reiterate what Jay was saying. As you go through the list, you uncheck the people that do not qualify. You're going to be collecting those teacher agreements that they're going to be signing, and you're going to be collecting those. Once you have those numbers, then you, as Jay said, you're going to enter the number of agreements that you have. So then that way we will also verify it against the number of teachers that you left checked. Go ahead, Hannah, and change the next slide. Another thing that you need to realize is we need you to retain these teacher agreements for 5 years. So make sure that you keep those someplace nice and safe. Once all the supplemental agreements have been collected, and the fall bed staff collection contact then must answer the remaining questions that we have, update its list of in-person teachers, and certify that that data has been done. Next slide, Hannah. The department will send the superintendent and the head of the non-public a link to the teacher retention payment assurances and information collection after you guys have certified your application that Jay was talking about earlier. Once all those supplemental agreements have been collected, and what you are agreeing to or declining, what you are agreeing to will be in a Google folder. So you will need a Google login in order to do this, which includes agreeing to or declining program assurances, requesting reimbursement for additional costs to cover the employer's portion of the federal payroll tax, and providing payment information. there's a question that popped up, so I couldn't see what I was reading. The payment information, which talks about the payroll date when the recipients were paid, will also need to be stated in that Google form. Next slide. Okay, to receive the program funds, the district superintendent or head administrator of the non-public must assure that all teacher retention payment funds received by the Department of Ed will be provided to eligible full-time in-person classroom teachers who agree to complete their contract for the remainder of the current school year and use for no other purpose, and that the district or school has a supplemental agreement in place for each eligible full-time in-person classroom teacher and will retain those for 5 years. So as I keep referring to full-time in-person classroom teacher, so what that means, we talked about before, an example of somebody who would not qualify as somebody who is listed as an administrator. Even though they may have a teaching license, they would not be included. Part-time teachers, so if you only have part-time assignment with the district, they also would not be included. Next slide. And then it says, I assure that my district or school will distribute 100% of the funds received to all full-time in-person classroom teachers that accepted the retention payments during the March pay period, withhold payment of funds to any teacher on administrative leave at the time of disbursement, and only pay the full-time in-person classroom teacher on administrative leave if the administrative suspension is resolved by June 30th of 2022, and not pay any teacher that taught exclusively online between March 2019 and June 30th of 2022. Next slide. Make reasonable effort to locate any teacher who violates the term of the supplemental agreement and maintain documentation that each recipient completed the current year assignment, and for purposes of potential audits and monitoring, do so for a 5-year period after funds are expended. Next slide. Okay, during its March pay period, the district and school must pay all full-time in-person classroom teachers who accepted funds, of course, with the exception of those who are on administrative leave, and full-time in-person classroom teacher on administrative leave, as we talked about before, will have to be, that administrative suspension will have to be resolved by June 30th of 2022 if they are going to receive one of these payments. Next slide. The department will distribute the teacher retention payments to districts and accredited non-public schools on a reimbursement basis. On April 1st of 2022, the department will then process these reimbursement payments to the schools in the accredited non-public schools that completed all the requirements that we talked about in the timelines. And then that should be in the districts or the accredited non-public schools account by April 8th. For those accredited non-public schools, most of you already have W-9s that were submitted to us because you're also part of the EANS program. And so if you have not submitted a W-9 to us, we will be contacting you before we get too far into this so that we can make sure that you get the W-9 submitted to us. And if you're going to receive a direct deposit, you submit the appropriate documentation to Department of Administrative Services. Next slide. For purposes of potential audits, the district and accredited school must maintain the documentation that each of the teachers completed their current year's assignment. This documentation must be kept for 5 years. and examples of acceptable documentation, time records that show that they finished out the year. Maybe a document, if you don't have any of that, a document signed by the teacher and the school administration indicating that the teacher assignment was completed with a date for the signing of the document. So at the end of the school year, if they were to sign a document that said they completed their assignment, that should also be enough documentation to show that they finished out the rest of the school year. Next slide, please. Okay, right now we have gotten to the end here. As you can see, the general process and timeline. You can communicate with your school improvement consultants, data collection. You can talk with Jay Pennington. Teacher retention payment applications. The technical aspects of that, you can refer to Shilly Neese. Accounting, you can talk to Cassandra Klein. Teacher eligibility, you can refer those to me, and any other topics dealing with this, you can also refer to me. And as it says there, the additional guidance information will be on the Future Ready Iowa Pre-K-12 webpage. All right, Hannah, go ahead.
Thank you, Steve. I'm going to jump in real quick just to recap a couple of things at a high level. Thank you, Steve and Jay, both for going over that. You know, just in response to them, I'm already seeing quite a few questions in there. One thing I just want to reiterate that the list that has been pre-populated that will be sent to you is going to answer a lot of those eligibility questions for you. So we were able to apply parameters to ensure we're sending you the people that, based on how this has been defined, would be eligible. So a lot of those one-off questions that a lot of you are putting in there, if you could please wait until you see your list. And then if you feel like there's somebody that you think should be eligible isn't on there, that would be the time to follow up or compare it to the Q&A list that we're going to send you versus trying to go all of that now. Because like has been stated, we are going to send you the people that, based on what we know about them, would be eligible. Your primary responsibility then would be two major ones are that, has that person left since you reported them to us in beds? And are they currently not eligible because potentially they're on administrative leave? And then again, you would have until June to identify that. So that's going to be your most high level pieces. The other part I want to reiterate is that even if a teacher, whether they accept or decline, you must collect the assurance from each of them. So they will indicate either way, but we have to collect all of those. There will also be, and this is maybe getting ahead of things a little bit, but there will be a question that will be explained to you in that application where there is a supplementary question that says, yes, I accept these funds. There'll be a next question that will ask them to indicate whether they are planning to or have taught any after-school programming or summer school programming, because that simply allows us to use a different pot of money, and that's purely for eligibility reasons. So you'll see that very clearly articulated in the application. Another piece too that we want to emphasize that will be in the guidance document is that, let me pull this up real quick so I say this the correct way. Just one second, I had it right here. Is for a request for additional costs to cover the employer portion of federal payroll taxes. The intention is for the teacher to receive the full $1,000. And so there will be an option for you to request those additional funds to cover that cost. And that will be in the guidance document and outlined in the application as well. And then just a reminder too that a guidance document will be sent out in addition to additional information on the application process that Jay talked about as well. Now I think framing all of that and using some of the things we just talked about in the context of questions that are asked, I think Hannah can go through that and bring up any questions that are still outstanding that we would want to go over now.
Can I just add one thing, and that is, we are going to send a follow-up email to fall bed staff contacts tomorrow morning that provides more detail. related to the application. But just wanted to mention that we're going to specifically reach out to everyone that has access to that app so they can start on the process.
Thanks, Jay.
So one of the first questions is whether this includes preschool or not.
The answer to that is yes, right, Jay?
Yeah, I think the rule of thumb, and we've got a lot of very similar questions. The rule of thumb really can be answered by, are they full-time? Are they 100% in the classroom? And so if it's a full-time pre-K teacher that's 100% in the classroom, that the answer is yes.
Correct.
What
And-
about TLC? Oh, sorry.
And anticipating a couple other questions, if I'm providing direct services to students, but not necessarily in a classroom, like I'm the title teacher or I'm an interventionist, I'm providing services directly. I'm a special education teacher. I co-teach, and that's my full-time assignment. My full-time assignment involves directly dealing with students. I would be included in the list also. So even though I don't have Mr. Mays's class, I don't have a room.
Right.
I have students that I'm meeting with. So special educators, English, EL teachers would also be included.
And again, I think a lot of these questions are going to be answered when you get your list, because you're going to see who's already been identified for you. But certainly happy to help address some of that. But again, we applied the parameters to the information we had in beds, and you will have that list in front of you. I think it might be easier for you to see, okay, these are a clear understanding of who falls within the parameters, and then based on your own maybe specific circumstances, if you don't see a person on that list, then you might want to ask a specific question, why, but without knowing if we already identified them for you, I think we're sort of guessing at this point.
Hannah, next question.
Does this include TLC positions?
Again, that's going to go back to depending on what role they're playing. And so it's really going to be focused on full-time classroom teachers. So once we pull how they've been identified in beds and you see that list, if you feel you need to make a justification, you feel like someone isn't identified as being eligible based on the role they're serving, please reach out to us after you receive that list.
Steve, this one's for you. How can state dollars flow to non-public schools?
How can state dollars flow to non-public schools?
Yes.
If the state dollars are allowable for those non-public schools, then they could flow through them. State dollars, it depends on what categorical dollars we're talking about. We have certain state dollars that we can flow through to non-public schools for certain things, like for instance, textbooks, transportation, a lot of things along those lines. And we have other funding streams which do not have limits on being flowed through to non-public schools. So it depends upon the funding stream or whatever service that is being provided through that non-public school. Next question, Anna.
Well, most of these are specific like eligibility questions, but to Dr. Liebel's point, I will just try to go to other areas. Is FICA and IPERS paid also? Is this payment IPERS eligible?
No, well, the amount of additional cost that will go with the $1,000 is only going to pay the employer's portion of the FICA. So it's the $76.50 for that $1,000. There will be no additional funds other than the employer's portion that goes with that. hopefully that answers the question. Next question, Hannah, or a follow-up?
Okay. So retiring teachers who submitted a resignation, do they receive the $1,000 retention bonus?
Are they retiring before the end of the school year or after the end of the school year? If they're retiring after the end of the school year, that means they have met the requirement of completing their contract for this current school year. So as long as they don't leave before then, I think they would qualify.
What if you pay someone in March, but they don't stay for the whole school year? Kind of the same point here, but.
Yeah, if they don't stay for the whole school year, the district has a responsibility to try to work with that person. As we indicated in the presentation, because we need to go back and probably get those funds from them if they decide not to complete it. So that's one of the things that we need to make sure of, is that we make sure that they do finish out. Otherwise, you're going to have to take reasonable steps to try to get the reimbursement, or not the reimbursement, but the payment back.
Can we use our ESSER money to pay all staff not covered by this payment $1,000?
If you meet certain requirements, if you want to know what those specific requirements are, you can email me. I can send those out, or we can put it in with the, I hate to mix it in with this because it really doesn't apply to this. But yes, you can, but certain requirements have to be met in order to do that. And some of those things are, there has to be an agreement before the services are provided. There has to be COVID related reason. We have to maybe be trying to retain them, or they either have to have that or additional services that they are providing where we can give them more funds. So I have specific items identified in a sheet that I can send out to whoever would like to use ESSER, as opposed to doing this with other staff members, bus drivers, things like that.
How can you pay a teacher in March that is on admin leave but have until June 30 to clear that? Payroll periods in early March cannot get this submitted and approved by our teacher payroll date.
Right. So if they are on administrative leave, what that means is you probably wouldn't pay them the $1,000 in March. You would pay them after that, after it had been resolved. So there may be a few teachers, assuming you have teachers on administrative leave, that you wouldn't receive payment on April 8th because they haven't been cleared, or the administrative leave hasn't been resolved. But as long as it's resolved by June 30th of 2022, that teacher can receive payment. So at that point in time, you would probably pay them in the May time frame if it got cleared up before then, or you may pay them, after that, and then we would work to get you the additional funding that you need for those teachers that were their administrative leave was resolved before June 30th. So there may be a couple teachers, if they are on administrative leave, that you don't get paid on April 8th, but we will pay you for those teachers moving forward.
Just to be clear, Steve, that's going to be a sort of a one-off manual process. It's not going to be part of the application. We'll just have to handle those on an individual basis.
Absolutely.
And just to clarify, I think the way the question was presuming you would pay them in March. You aren't paying them in March.
Right.
So you need to uncheck those. And then you have until June to potentially pay them, the end of June.
Yep, absolutely.
Then there's a question, sort of a follow-up to that. How are we defining administrative leave?
Thomas, could you help me with that a little bit?
The intent here is for teachers who are in the disciplinary process. So I think looking at administrative leave versus other types of leave, this is specifically for teachers who are subjected to Chapter 102 or they're placed on leave while things are working their way through Board of Ed examiners. That's the what was targeted by this specific restriction. If you use administrative leave for other types of purposes, we can workshop that or troubleshoot that. But what this was really aimed at is folks who are in the penalty box while an investigation is pending.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Either local because of Chapter 102 or other disciplinary matters, or because of actions pending before the Board of Ed examiners.
Great, thank you.
Is there a way to delay payment and collection until next year so that we know teachers will stay for the next school year?
Not with these funds. There are ways where the district could utilize their own ESSER funds to put something else in place that would have them sign their contract for next year and actually show up. You could use your ESSER funds to retain them to do that. But this program is specifically for the current year and finishing it out. So this does not apply to anything other than that, but you could use your own ESSER funds to do something along those lines.
What about a teacher who is on unpaid board approved leave for absence for second semester, not FMLA? I'm assuming they're asking about eligibility here.
You say it again, Hannah.
What about a teacher who is on unpaid board approved leave of absence for second semester, not FMLA?
So if this isn't, I need to ask the question, but this isn't a disciplinary action of any type.
Yeah, Steve, Hannah, I think that individual needs to just reach out to us directly.
Yeah.
I think we got to be careful answering that without necessarily understanding the context. So whoever asked that question, if you could just please send one of us a note,
Yep.
Me, Steve, or Thomas, we'll make sure we follow up on that one.
Yep.
Didn't mean to cut you off, Steve. Sorry.
No.
There will be individual circumstances. We want to really try and capture high level, concerns or questions that would be more across the board. Like there's a lot of, again, it's a full-time in-person classroom teacher. A lot of what I'm seeing in here are different variations of that definition. That is the core of this definition. And again, you will see that with the list of people that are presented to you.
Right.
But that's kind of your default way to think about it.
And I know a question was brought up earlier about IPERS. I think we're going to have to workshop that in terms of whether or not there's a payment that would go with that or not, because I know that at IPERS, there's also the employer part as well as the teacher part. And so we're going to have to workshop that, and we will have that within our question and answer FAQ that comes out, that we answer some of those things. And if that is something we need to consider as an additional cost, then we will put that in. But we need to workshop that because it wasn't part of the overall thing that we've done today so far.
Okay,
Next.
so am I interrupting anyone?
No.
Okay.
Next.
Can you clarify the intent? Is it teachers that taught during the 2020-21 school year and remained with the district through the 2021-22 school year? There's other ones also that are kind of asking why not virtual classrooms. I know the governor had some comments on this. If we want to clarify.
I think that will be clarified in the guidance, because I think it talks about the cutoff date for the fall, but it essentially, Jay, do you have the date in front of you? It's October. Is it October of 21?
Yeah.
October of 21 until the end of this year. And it is for those that are teaching in person in a classroom. So it didn't have to go to the past year. It would not be anyone teaching virtually. And it just goes to the end of this school year.
Right. And there were certain categories of people who, weren't necessarily included in this pay thing. And there had to be lines drawn. So this is where it came out at this time.
I do believe.
Oh, sorry, go.
Go ahead. I see two. One that's asking about the codes. Yes, those will be provided to you in the follow-up. And then one specifically about maternity leave that I believe would be yes, they would be eligible. Sorry, Hannah.
No, I mean, so a lot of these questions I think the participants can see, but it really is just a lot of like specific questions. So I'm a little slow in asking questions because I'm trying to get to some more high level questions.
And one thing that might be helpful is I'm just sort of thinking of right now, I think if a lot of the remaining questions are these really specific ones, it might be helpful to schedule a follow-up, because you're going to be receiving a bunch of information from us, and then you're going to kind of have a better handle of what this actually means for you. These are my people. This is the Q&A. These are the directions that I now have. Then we have a second opportunity, ask what questions remain. I know it's really hard right now because you don't see it yet. You don't have it yet. We've walked through the high level parts, but I think once you have some time, we wanted to make sure we could talk about it with you first before we just sent it. Once we send it out, I'm thinking it might be beneficial to schedule another follow-up next week, right after this, to answer additional questions, or just to take what we have in this Q&A and anything we don't think is answered in the documents, make sure we really expand the follow-up FAQ and try and catch some of those there. I do believe we have a regularly scheduled stakeholder meeting on, when is the next one, Heather? We missed the superintendent one on Monday. When is the next one scheduled? Sorry, I put her on this, and that might be too late, but we're certainly open to doing that also once we finish walking through the rest of the Q&A.
We have the next Friday Q&A session for schools on Friday, March 4th. And then the next superintendent webinar is Monday. Make sure.
I do want to make sure we have some time to address any other questions. So I think what we'll do is we will work through the rest of the Q&A, and based on what we feel like we can answer, whether or not we think there's still so many outstanding that we need to schedule another follow-up, or after we send this out, we get enough questions from the field, we're happy to schedule just another time. That's optional if you want to pop in and ask questions. So we'll work on that internally. But what I think we should do now is, I think this is set to end at 4. Unless there's anything else from the panel that one panelist that want to share, I think it would be appropriate now. We'll stop this recording for this portion of the webinar and go on to any other questions